company around this important topic gives me great encouragement that this is seen as important to you all. So hopefully over the next hour, we will have a really useful discussion. I have got a fabulous panel, and I'm going to frame the topic of conversation and explain how we're going to approach it in just a few moments. But first, I wanted to ask you a question. I want to ask you, do you think that the pandemic represents more of an opportunity or more of a threat to progress towards gender equality in our industry, in the asset management industry? So just the progress or threat towards gender equality. Charlotte is going to, there's a pop-up screen that's just come up. You can click on the opportunity or threat, and we will await the results. But in the meantime, while we await the results, I just want to, we're starting as we mean to carry on, because we would love this to be a really interactive session. And what we'd like to hear from you are questions as we go through, ideas. We have got a lot of ideas that we're going to share, but we don't have all the answers, of course. So we'd love this to be a sort of co-creation of a solution for the industry. So please do use the chat button as we go through the next hour. I will keep an eye on the chat and weave in your questions, your observations, and if you want us to ask any other polling questions, then also that's an opportunity for you to make some suggestions there. I'd also, just again while we wait for the results, I'd also like to point out that the chat contains the bios, brief bios of our panelists. So you should be able to see there. I'm going to introduce them in a moment, but rather briefly. So please look to the chat if you want to find out a little bit more. Charlotte, do we have a result yet? All right, so, okay. I'm going to take that. I mean, it's close-ish, but it is quite decisively now more of a threat. Now, what's particularly interesting, I think, about the result here is that last November, beginning of last November, when I asked at the seminar that we had across all dimensions of diversity for the Diversity Project, I asked a similar question: was the pandemic more of an opportunity or threat around diversity and inclusion? And there it was quite overwhelming that 72% felt things were more, it was more of an opportunity. So I think that that reflects sort of the mood as we've traveled and as we obviously see a lot more difficulties, particularly around women's lives, around the lives of men who play a part in their family life as well. The pandemic obviously has threatened, widened inequalities across many dimensions. We're going to talk about gender today, but of course it's certainly not the only one that the Diversity Project cares about. And we've seen a widening inequalities around race. Note today the publication of the news that there's, none of the top 3 roles across any of the FTSE companies are held by ethnic minority people. We've seen widening inequalities around health, obviously, around education, socioeconomically. You name it, it has presented a bit of an uphill struggle for the work of Diversity Project and the work of so many others in this space. So if we don't do anything, I'm afraid we will go backwards. The idea is we're going to try to do something proactively, because I don't believe that it's necessarily the case that we will go backwards. I think there's a lot of commitment in our industry to build back better, and we need to concentrate obviously on the specifics of what that means. And we're going to be talking a lot today, I say, not just about women, but about the pressures on working families, what firms can do, what individuals can do, what men and women can do to help create more career opportunities alongside some of these additional burdens. So without further ado, let me start with the introductions to our panel. I'm going to introduce them one at a time because otherwise everyone will forget who's who, apart from the fact you can see their names. But anyway, first, I'm delighted that we are joined by Claire Black. Claire is Principal Global Investments, and she is co-lead of the Diversity Project's Working Families Group. So it's going to share her personal experience to kick us off. Over to you, Claire.
Thank you, Helena. So as Helena said, I would like to share my personal experience as a single parent during this pandemic. From the minute I wake up to the time I go to bed, I'm juggling the role of parent, teacher, caterer and cleaner, whilst trying to hold down my full-time role as business support manager at Principal. My son is 8 years old, so he isn't yet old enough to learn independently, and his online class size of 70 children makes it hard for him to get their help when he needs it. So my time is interrupted throughout the morning, helping him with his learning so that he doesn't fall behind and can meet the requirement to submit 5 pieces of work by the end of each day. The teaching after lunch is left to the parents, so having the bandwidth to focus on my work is patchy until 3 o'clock. If I were to quantify just the homeschooling element, I'd say I spend around 2 hours giving ad hoc learning support throughout the morning, about 45 minutes a day on school admin that supports the home learning. Now, I love my job, but I never thought I'd be a support manager for my son's schooling as well. I spend 1 hour solidly teaching, and this isn't just getting my head around the way maths is taught now, or having to refresh myself on causal conjunctions, adverbial phrases, similes, and metaphors. And someone please tell me how I support my child with Mandarin. There is also the added stress of trying to keep him motivated and focused, so tensions often run high. So you can imagine the relief I feel when my ex-husband takes over these responsibilities every other week, because this means I can fully focus on my work and catch up. This does, of course, require his employer to apply the same flexibility to his work schedule for this to work. When schools eventually will reopen, I will have different challenges, as my son's father won't be living close enough to be able to help during the week. I can honestly say that this is the most exhausted and stressed I've ever been, despite being really fortunate that my boss, Tim Stumpf, is hugely supportive, and not just to me. He regularly emphasises to employees across our European business the importance of giving colleagues some slack, showing empathy, and being aware that everyone has different challenges at this time. He has taken the time to understand my personal circumstances and offers me the flexibility I need, as well as the reassurance that this won't impact my career journey. Even though I know Tim has my back, this doesn't stop me feeling guilty that I'm not focused on my work and I'm not providing the support people need.
Thank you so much for sharing your personal experiences, Claire. Obviously, you are very lucky in the sense that you have an empathetic boss. Perhaps everyone should expect an empathetic boss. I'm going to turn to Sasha Calistan, who's at Northern Trust and the other co-lead of our Working Families group, to give her perspective, both on what Claire's explained and the benefit that she's had from having such an empathetic boss, but also anything that you've seen from other working family members in your group that is, I know it's at the moment when we ask you to do anything, it's all extra stress, and it just all becomes a bit chicken and egg sometimes, that you actually can't have the space to do the extra things that would in turn make your lives easier. Sasha, over to you.
Thank you, Helena. And I would say unequivocally that yes, empathy is absolutely what parents need right now and going forward. So, Claire was talking about how much she values the support and empathy that Tim's given her. It doesn't remove the challenge, but it really does ease the pressure and certainly protects her sanity. But it's not always easy for firms to understand exactly what's going on either. So, I do think we need some engagement between managers and parents. We need help for managers to really stand in the shoes of the parents, and for both of them to work together to agree the best way to support. And I think firms also need to encourage parents to speak out. I don't think all mothers want to highlight their situation, so it's key to make them feel comfortable and know it won't prejudice their situation. And whilst none of us expected, as Claire said, to be adding teacher and printer to our CV skills, I do think, we need to not simply complain or indeed quietly drown in it, but we need to own it and come up with some ideas as to actually what we need. And I think some firms are doing it well. Northern Trust, like principals, empowering managers to work with parents and put flexibility in place that they need. And I think it's important that it's on an individual level, because everyone's home situation is completely unique. So, a big shout out to the dads that are sharing, less so perhaps to those that disappear upstairs and leave us juggling the homeschool. But even when two parents are sharing the load, it does tend to be the mum that the child goes to for support. And And of course, every child's school provision is unique. I'm not sure we all have to support Mandarin, Claire, but you know, some schools are 100% online. They're minimizing the daily battles that we're having with printers and scanners. And so there's less parental support. But, you know, it's not the norm, unfortunately. And some schools have a lot of key workers. So, you know, in those cases, parents, you know, the children are supported about 15 minutes of the day, maybe an hour, and the rest of the day is the parents being de facto teachers. So, you know, in summary, Helena, I would say we're in a pretty unique situation. And some of the historical challenges that we faced of home working have been absolutely blown out of the water, which is fab. But, you know, and many parents are supporting us parents more than ever. But I think there's still plenty that can be done. It's just the beginning of our journey.
Thank you, Sasha. Well, thank you both for you know, being forthcoming about what you see working and what you feel, you know, are still the challenges. One idea that's come up in the chat that I must share, in case others haven't seen it, is that Jane Stiles is mentioning, just to the panelists, I think, that she's heard of a company where staff members are taking turns to run online teaching subjects and sessions where they're expert in for their colleagues' children. So perhaps you can find a Mandarin specialist, Claire. We might have solved that one. Let's turn to some of the specific ideas that are already underway, and let's have a look at those. Mitesh Seth is the CEO of Reddington, and I know I can say this, Mitesh, sparing your blushes, a fabulous supporter of the efforts to improve gender balance in our industry. But Mitesh, you were sharing the other day that you were talking to the women at Reddington, and they were, you know, giving you some feedback. Do you mind sharing that, and also, you know, what's changed since the pandemic in terms of your own efforts?
Thanks, Helena. So whilst we've made meaningful progress in, say, hiring women onto the board, into management and other senior roles, or working with our line managers, and reducing our gender pay gap and bonus gap, so that stands at 4.9% and 3.5% respectively now, the reality is we've got a huge amount of work still to do in developing and retaining talent. And ensuring we remain an open, fair and inclusive environment for all. And you can't ever stop on that journey. And as you say, our women's network has been a fantastic safe space for women in the firm to discuss the key issues and obstacles we face, with a clear route for escalation through our COO. And I find this has been really valuable to help us get out of our echo chamber and really understand what's going on and where we need to focus. So the feedback from our women's network on this topic has been very clear. If women are excluded from the crucial decision-making spheres, if men don't actually step up in the home and take up the flexibility offered at work, and if the childcare crisis persists, then the pandemic will represent a massive step backwards, not forwards, in our effort towards gender equality. The pandemic has exacerbated the issues that were already there. You know, and just the fact that we're remote working more isn't enough to tackle it. We need to get to the root cause. For example, the gender pay gap, the incentive schemes that ensure that it's on average more women that are taking that flexibility than men, the perpetuated kind of traditional gender roles. To be very specific, we were called out by our women's network for linking flexible working to retaining female talent. We need to be clearer that this is about flexibility for all, the availability, the role modeling, and need for this to be used by both men and male and female employees. And I guess what they've opened my eyes to is at a macro level, flexibility in and of itself isn't helpful to women in the longer term, if it's always women taking up the offer of flexibility so that their male partner's career remains unaffected. It's usually by default that the person making less will often be the one to take a step back in terms of responsibility, working hours, days, and pay. When we last surveyed our firm, 99% of people at Reddington said that they want to come back to some kind of flexible working post-COVID-19. So we will come out of this crisis in a completely new working situation, but that's not a silver bullet in itself. The women in our firm are asking us to support, encourage, and normalize men in taking up flexible working, to ease the burden on women in their lives, and in taking more responsibility for childcare, for elderly care, and domestic responsibilities.
I'm from PIC, and I just emailed.
Sorry, someone's just Dimple. Sorry, could you just put it on? Sorry, Dimple.
A link. She said, are you using this link?
Sorry,
I'm
someone's
just
talking to me on the
sorry.
other.
Type it into the chat and perhaps we try and, I don't know how we're going to
Okay.
do that actually.
Sorry, Dimple, I'm going to have to ask you to liaise with Charlotte. Sorry.
I'm just going to type it into the
Forgive
chat so you
me,
know
there's
what it's like.
extra stuff happening on that screen there. Thank you, Mitesh. It's very powerful to hear your interaction and also with the women, but also thinking about this bigger issue about, which is a microcosm of society, I think, that obviously we have this real need to shift it from being a women's issue around the extra family duties. Also, that's not always children, obviously, it can be elder care, can be other responsibilities. To shift that into being more shared. And clearly there is an opportunity for the investment industry to lead the way on that. We perhaps aren't ahead of the curve at present, but hopefully we can perhaps use this moment to think about how we might address that. Stuart White has been unceremoniously kicked out by mistake, so we're just trying to get him back on. But so I'm going to turn to Kathleen next. Kathleen is another member of our fabulous CEO subgroup on the gender work stream. She is a very senior woman at Goldman Sachs. Again, you can read about her in the bio. But I'm really interested, Kathleen, whether you're finding right now that more junior women are reaching out to you, whether it's easier they find to talk to another woman. And obviously that can create a problem because there aren't that many senior women to start with.
Thank you for the opportunity to share. And I would say, I have been approached by, working parents, probably more on balance, women that are struggling. And like Sasha said, it still seems that more of the burden at home falls to women. So I think I am someone that's quite approachable and people do reach out to. And I've heard, unfortunately, stories like Claire's, several times over. And, I think that as a firm, we've heard the stories, we've tried to respond like many firms out there. Certainly, Northern and Principal have already been mentioned, but really focusing on what tools can we put in place. And it's not one tool that's going to solve this. It's going to be people that get support from various different things. We focused on resilience and put things in place over the last year to really help people cope with things like uncertainty and a focus on mental wellness, helping people learn some tools to have a more open mindset. There's things like meditation groups in place, just different elements that could appeal to certain people. There's been a lot of support for physical wellness as well and different things along nutrition. We focused on middle managers, similar to what's been mentioned, really trying to help that cohort be able to support the women and working parents, but more as we're talking about here today, the women on their teams to make sure that support is in place and that empathy is in place. There's been some tools that we've put in place around helping the children of our employees. There's been some extra COVID leave that we've made available to working parents so that they can take extra days to help focus on what's needed at home. There's been some partnering we've done with some external firms to provide access to bespoke tutoring for children. And so there's been different tools that we've tried to put in place. We also have done a few panels that have working parents joining and sharing their own stories, much like we're sharing and Claire is sharing today, because I think that just having that normalized and people not feeling like they're alone in this struggle, I think has also been, well received. So I don't think it's any one thing that firms are doing, but a combination of things that will hopefully, provide for each individual person, because everyone's situation is different, some level of support to help them, through what is now, as you pointed out in the early survey, a resurgence of challenges and where people's minds and heads are at, with homeschooling back in the fore and whatnot. So I think it's a real combination, and we just have to keep at it, and we have to, not let it slip until the world feels a little bit easier.
Thanks, Kathleen. Well, that was one of the reasons why we wanted to have this discussion straight out the gates, effectively in the new year. Obviously, start of February rather than start of January, but just to really make sure that we don't sort of just, quietly just set by and just things happen around us. We can take more control and change the trajectory. I'm convinced of that. But John, I'm going to turn to you. John Terry has recently retired. He was a partner at PwC for many years. He was at PwC for over 30 years, 3 decades, and has been a great friend of the Diversity Project and worked with us on many issues, including analysis of gender pay gap in our industry and what he calls the maturity of our efforts around this topic. John, you've heard some observations already. I'd be really interested in yours, really based on your sense of where we're at as a whole in the industry and the sorts of things that you've seen some firms do that have been effective. Also, I suppose just, what advice you would give firms which are feeling, okay, we can't do much about the pandemic. Sadly, none of us can, but we really want to make sure that we don't go backwards when it comes to gender equality.
Thank you, Helena. I will start actually by reiterating what all the panelists have said so far, which is the critical thing is for organisations to truly understand what all of their people, not just their women who have childcare responsibilities, but all of their people, what their issues are during this pandemic. And I think it was Sasha mentioned, a number of people don't come forward to talk about those issues. So it's really important to have a plan in place and to activate that and have regular check-ins with all the staff. Now, we work in an industry that has relatively small numbers of people, for each of the organisations, even the very largest, and with a highly motivated and tooled up middle managers in particular, then you're able to do that. And we've seen a number of organisations being really good at that, and the sort of examples that Claire said with her boss, but that's not happening universally. So really understanding the issues and not assuming that what your personal insights are through your own experiences and maybe the 2 or 3 people as a senior leader you're talking to who have challenges are representative of the whole of your organization. And I think that is probably the most critical first stage which needs to continue throughout, because the issues change. And this third lockdown, some of those issues and the challenges are different and more so than in previous lockdowns, for example. So I think that's really important. And one of the expressions which has been touched on here is around mental well-being. And again, that's not only for women with childcare responsibilities, it's also everybody, and women included, who don't have childcare responsibilities. Don't assume just because a woman has no childcare responsibilities that actually everything is hunky-dory for them. Go and talk to them and really, really understand that. And I think this is a huge opportunity if organisations get that right, because going back to your point about maturity, Helen, I'm afraid that the investment industry as a whole is what I would call in the early stages of maturity of tackling the diversity and inclusion challenges when compared with some other industries, and it's more fragile, and so there's a real danger that if organisations are not truly understanding their people and helping with those challenges now, in particular their female talent, that they will go backwards and it is really hard to rebuild. But there's a real opportunity if they do take that big step and continue to really understand it, that it will help open up greater opportunities as well. So I think that maturity point is incredibly important from an industry as a whole.
Thank you. Now, Stuart White, who's CEO of HSBC Asset Management, says he can hear. I'm not sure if we can hear you, Stuart. So do you mind saying something, and we'll see if we can go to you next. Oh, this is looking promising here. His badge has come up on the screen. Stuart, looks like you're on mute though. All right, let's go to Stephen next.
Sorry, can you hear me, Helena?
Yes, we've got you. Great, fabulous.
Apologies.
And see you. No worries. These things happen, but thank you for persevering and making your way back. So I was going to ask you sort of follow up from Mitesh in terms of the state of the union, as it were, at HSBC Asset Management, in terms of what the women in the organisation are reporting to you. But actually, we've had a question come in that perhaps I can weave in at this point. We're going to touch on some of the practical things that companies can do later, but it's so on point for the project that you're working on, Stuart. The question is from Lydia Emmanuel, who says, surely some of this comes down also to tackling the maternity penalty. The vast majority of companies still only provide 2 weeks paternity leave, if at all, and women's careers continue to be hampered by this. Can you talk about right now, even though it's slightly out of sync with what we talked about before, the extended leave project that you have kickstarted? with Cantor and the Diversity Project, as well as anything that you're hearing from the women in your organisation?
Yes, no, of course. So we did a research project last year where we employed Cantor research, and it was specifically focused on the investment community within HSBC Global Asset Management and around career progression. And one of the key things that came out of that research was obviously maternity leave being a potential issue, not just within our firm, but across the industry. So what we've done is we've collated 10 other firms from the industry, including asset managers and investment consultants. And we're going through a research program, which is a qualitative series of interviews with individuals within firms, and also then a quantitative approach. So we're actually going out to all members of the Diversity Project, not just the 10 firms who are participating in the interview process. And that will include both females and males. And the idea here is to get some data points and the issues that individuals are facing when they take maternity leave. But we're actually extending that to paternity leave and sabbaticals, just in terms of extended leave. But most importantly, we're looking at what are the solutions available. In fact, we've got a meeting this afternoon with the working group just to start to debate some of the ideas that the various working members have. Ideas such as, can an individual portfolio manager retain their track record when they leave an organization for a year or a couple of years? Can they come back, and can that be sort of a snapshot in time? Will investment consultants support them with that rating that they had before? Could we offer, for instance, as an industry, a utility or a service where ex-fund managers step in and support around specific asset classes, particularly for smaller firms who haven't got the bench strength? So a lot of ideas will come out of this process, and we'll publish a report afterwards, which will hopefully be useful for the industry. And then maybe just briefly moving to some of the messages that we have within our firm at the moment around the impact of COVID-19. And it's very clear in my mind, that this is the biggest people risk that I've seen in my career. And we're all about managing risk, clearly. And from, in terms of the downside impact of this, it's clearly having an impact on mental health and wellness. But also, my worry is around career progression. As working parents, are effectively impacted through the crisis, and potentially beyond as well. How is that going to impact their careers? And could this actually exacerbate the scenario we have in our industry, where we're not seeing enough females in more senior positions, which clearly then exacerbates the gender pay gap issue? So, I absolutely agree with fellow panelists. And my heart goes out to the stories at the beginning from Claire and Sasha. We've got to have empathy as an industry, and this is at all levels. It's not just the leadership. And one message that's come back loud and clear is that there is a disconnect at the moment. Leaders who, whether they don't have families or whether they have older families now, just don't know what it's like for our colleagues who are going through this experience. And so what we've done is we've done a couple of things, and I'll come back to that a bit later as well. But we're trying to better connect the leaders with the working parents. We're doing that through mentorships, through reverse mentoring. We have what we call exchange meetings, where we're being very clear that flexibility and pushing deadlines out is acceptable, and people should not feel guilty about not bringing 100% of themselves to the working day, which is impossible, let's face it. And finally, we've got a very clear message from management that we need to prioritize better and push out deadlines. So I can touch on a few things later on, but it's really that empathy that I think is crucial at the moment.
Thank you, Stuart. Well, last but not least in this first half, turning to Stephen Welton. Stephen runs the Business Growth Fund, and he is the executive sponsor of the Gender Workstream for the Diversity Project, and has done a lot in a practical sense around particularly helping women who have set up businesses. He'll probably talk about some of that work shortly. But I want to ask you now, Stephen, both sort of sweep up on what we've heard so far, but also there's been another question, which I think is a very good one, that women can be too nervous to talk about what's going on in their lives because they don't want to be seen as, hard work, sounds too girly, reminds them that they're women, etc. And one woman said to the person who asked this question, I'll mention the difficulties she's experiencing after bonus season, as I don't want to remind them that I'm a woman just yet. This obviously throws down the gauntlet somewhat to male allies a bit in terms of how to encourage people to feel that they can talk about these things without it being detrimental to their career, a point that's already come up. We're not talking here about trying to just be nice to women, we're talking about how to combine great work with a real life. Over to you for your thoughts on that.
Thank you, Helena. And so just going back to that poll at the beginning, maybe the reason that people see this as more of a threat now is broader in terms. Lockdown 3, certainly in my experience and more generally in our firm, is just more tiring, and everybody is tired of this. And clearly, with sort of childcare responsibilities on top of that, it's sort of just one layer after another. So I think, being an inveterate optimist, I hope we are not going in the wrong direction, but I think we just recognize this has gone on for a very long period of time. And it's incumbent on us, I think, as leaders across this industry, to ensure that we don't just sort of give up because this is all hard work and we're tired and we're just going to try and go back to where we were, because that clearly is not good enough. I think, picking up on the comments from Claire and Sasha, and trying to sort of unpick, what does empathy actually mean? Because we all talk about that and it's crucial. And in my mind, that is genuine understanding. It's not sort of paying lip service. Well, it must be quite tough to do homeschooling and then move on. Well, I've covered that because I've mentioned it in passing. Practically, what does that mean? Because it will develop proper understanding. And from that, I think you've got to communicate across a whole workforce, so men and women. So there is a genuine understanding that, in Claire's case, if she's tied up in the morning doing homeschooling, she's not possibly going to have either the physical or the mental time to be able to do her job. And it's really heartfelt when you hear her talking about feeling guilty. I mean, nobody should feel guilty for doing something as fundamentally crucial, like looking after their children. But this has to be understood by men just as much as it is by women. There's an interesting comment that Kate made in the chat. First of all, the phrase of always being on, that's tiring. And for those who've got work responsibilities and childcare responsibilities, they are always on. I mean, I don't suppose there is a time when you're not. And a linkage between pay and gender. So is it always the part of a relationship who is not as well paid who all of this falls onto? So again, I think that is the danger of stereotypes and falling back onto what is perhaps a convenient and easy way to think about these things. So when we talk about building back better, which is a good slogan, we have to make sure that we see this as an opportunity to identify male as well as female role models. So flexibility is something that men should be taking advantage of, not just that they can go and enjoy more social time, but they can actually pick up their share of the combined load in terms of home life. And my sense is there is a much greater recognition of the issue than there ever was before the pandemic, and that's possibly a good thing. There isn't enough practical change as a result of that. So how employers start to become much more thoughtful, recognizing what are the limitations on people, and then creating space to have downtime and to make sure that, the point about paternity leave, a couple of weeks isn't really very much at all. And that's not going to make a practical difference. So being fiercely practical on what will happen. And I think the best way to do that in any organization is to get ideas not just coming from the top, but coming from the people who are actually experiencing this day to day. And the role of people at the top is to actually, instill the right sort of culture and to support. Because again, I suppose just in closing, we should never have an environment where people feel worried to talk up, or I'm not going to talk up now because it's bonus season. And that is not a supportive culture. And ultimately, it will not be nearly as productive. So there is a real upside in addressing this issue. It's not political correctness. It's making for a much stronger, integrated, cohesive and supportive workforce.
Thank you. Well, let's turn our attention now to some practical ideas and things. These are things that are already in hand, but obviously this is not an exhaustive list. And going back to Mitesh first, and I want to pick up on something Stephen just said there about, what the role of the leader is and to set the culture and so forth. But one of the challenges, I'm going to ask you to talk specifically about how we can try to make the emphasis more on working families rather than, oh, this is all women's work. But also, how can we do that? And perhaps it might be a little bit different / easier in a consultant environment. The many of the fund managers, I mean, most of our fund managers are obviously men. It's the lifeblood of our industry. There is often a very sort of strong power base there, and they're often not that interested, forgive me if people are listening who are, but they're not that interested in pushing out the frontiers of diversity and inclusion. So just in terms of, how does one create the empathy? How does one create the starting point in terms of getting people to listen and to think about these issues, where perhaps they might have a much more traditional setup themselves? Any thoughts that you have, including obviously what Reddington has done
Sure.
to try to emphasize working families rather than just women?
Thanks, Helena. So we've specifically coming to your empathy and understanding, and I think Stephen put it well. It's not just nodding the head and hearing at once, but it's deeply feeling, knowing and understanding, and having your actions and behavior change by understanding someone else's perspective. Some of the things we've tried to do around that, because I think this really does come down to hearing and understanding and looking through people's eyes, walking in their shoes. Particularly as we approached pay promotions discussions at the end of last year, we ran a perspective session where we asked various people who to speak for 5 minutes to the entire firm. So this was kind of a 3-line whip. Everybody attends. It's a heck of a lot easier to do when you're all remote. And just to hear different perspectives of how people have found working from home and working really remotely, and the different types of challenges and what that has meant day to day, much like we heard with Claire at the start of this session. It is so powerful to hear that authentically and to be moved by it. We've gone further than that in our kind of the workshops we hold with everybody who manages people at Reddington. Again, much easier to do remotely than in the office. And once a quarter, what we've working with Jane Welsh and some of the diversity project, really having a conversation around how can we be better managers, and how do we hear and take feedback more openly, and how can we provide and create an inclusive environment within which we make change. And back to your fund manager's point, I think people will push back and challenge and or will retreat and feel threatened or shamed if they don't have a chance to discuss and talk in a safe space. And so for a lot of our team leaders, whether they be client-facing, kind of middle office or back office, have really valued having forums with other team leaders, other managers, to kind of honestly talk about the worries or the issues or their biases in this. Some other great work I've seen is Brenda Trinalden and her team at PwC are using virtual reality to help us walk in other people's shoes, and to see by having people actually walk in the shoes of employees whose perspective they can't see, whether that has a deeper impact. So those are some ideas we're doing and or exploring. Specifically, as I said before, a real focus we're making in making sure our return to office teams and decision-making groups are representative and balanced, and are really hearing the voices of the diversity of experience that people are going through.
Thanks, Mitesh. Well, I point out in the chat as well, Hayley Curtis has mentioned a 2-hour no meeting break over the lunch hour, which I know would be welcomed in my household, with everyone having a different lunch hour from schools. But I have also heard the counter that doesn't work for a global company, because obviously then it's not the same lunch hour. But anyway, there's always a solution and then a problem around the solution, isn't there? John, your suggested intervention, and perhaps you might want to talk a little bit about the gender pay gap here as well, what impact you think that could have if we resume reporting that.
Well, I'm going to be really quick before I mention that. I just want to pick up on this point about portfolio managers not always wanting to be supportive to the whole change agenda that's required. And I totally see that and hear that. But this is a cry out to the most senior leaders, including the panelists here. I think portfolio managers, more than anybody else, what gets measured gets done. You know, they live and die on performance. And my cry out to senior leaders is to truly have part of assessing all of their key leaders, but including portfolio managers' behaviors, which at this time, the most critical of that is truly understanding their people and being able to demonstrate that. And by the way, feedback from their people is a really important part of that. And that must impact their pay. That's what gets behaviors to change for PMs if it's connected with pay. And I think that's really critical. And it's actually part of the bigger issue of what I think organizations who are doing this, beginning to do this really, really well. And if you look outside the industry of some of the leaders, and that's to be seen to be taking this seriously as well as taking it seriously. And a part of that is being open and being transparent about what the issues are. And panelists today have been fantastic about being open. That includes being open about the numbers, being open about what is the gender pay gap, what is the ethnicity pay gap, dare I say, what is the disability pay gap, what is the LGBT plus pay gap, etc. Being open about that. And as you've said many times, Helene, I'm afraid this industry is one of the worst in terms of the size of the gender pay gap. And it is an industry that I implore, particularly those organisations that do not need to mandatorily disclose, i.e. those with less than 250 employees, to voluntarily do so. It's a critical point around showing your people that you're actually serious about it. That's data is only a small part of this, but it's a part of the tone of what you're setting to your own people as well as the outside world. And that's two specific points that senior leaders in organizations who can make those decisions around how PMs are assessed and putting way up the agenda, particularly now because of the COVID issues, the importance of their own personal behaviors and caring about their teams, and how they are seen as well as believing they're taking these issues seriously, and disclosure is part of that.
Thank you, John. Well, Stuart, you already had a chance to talk briefly about the extended leave project. So perhaps I can pick up on what John's just said there and ask you, without wishing to embarrass you in any way, about some of the male portfolio managers or the female portfolio managers that you have at HSBC, whether there are specific things that you have found helpful in terms of, I suppose, bringing people who might be not naturally inclined to pursue this agenda where you want them to be. Oh, you're on mute there.
Yeah, of course, Helena. So I think, first of all, I would say that, as an industry, we know we're under indexing in terms of females in portfolio manager positions. We're about 15% at HSBC Global Asset Management. And our aspiration is to get to 30% by 2030, in line with the program that the Diversity Project is supporting. And that is quite a big change, and it's going to take a big mindset shift. And what we've done as a group, and this is globally, but in the UK as well, is we've set up a diversity, equity, and inclusion initiative last year, which is top-down, sponsored by Nicola Moreau, our global CEO, and myself as the executive sponsor. We now have 150 members of that, volunteers of that initiative across 10 work streams.
Oh, we've lost you, Stuart, I'm afraid.
Sorry, Helen, can you hear me?
Yes, we can again now, but maybe put your camera off just in case it happens.
I'm having lots of technical problems. Apologies. So just to recap, the key thing here is we're embedding within the organisation, including within the investments area, a focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and we've actually embedded now some key objectives which are going into the scorecard. So back to John's point of, what gets measured gets done, and these are 4 key objectives around increasing awareness, having a more of an inclusive culture through education, a specific objective around gender balance within HSBC Global Asset Management, and one around minorities as well, minority balance. And the final one is around embedding what we do as a firm in how we practice our investments through ESG integration. So that is now firmly on the agenda. We have a specific gender and working parents work stream, and both of these are very, very active in terms of looking to solve problems across the firm, including in investments. And I have to say the reception has been tremendous. We've got a huge way to go, but I think there is certainly the intent there to make the change.
Thank you. Stephen, I think sometimes these discussions end up making it seem like women are just sort of hard work because there's so much stuff that has to happen to make us succeed and so forth. And yet, obviously, where we're all starting from is the fact that women have a huge amount to contribute, a huge amount to offer, and that we bring a bit of diversity of perspective sometimes to some problems that are difficult to solve without that diversity of perspective. Tell us a bit more about this fund that you are launching with, or have launched with Coutts, and how you're hoping that might encourage more for sponsorship of female-founded companies.
Yeah, thank you, Helena. I mean, this is a practical approach to the same issue. There are not enough female fund managers in the private equity industry, and there are not enough female entrepreneurs that are being supported by the investment industry. And part of that is not talking the right language, not creating the right space, which is both accessible and attractive to female entrepreneurs. The reality is the chances of a female startup raising significant capital and becoming a scale up is very, very small indeed. And that isn't because of lack of talent and lack of imagination and lack of good ideas. It's lack of sufficient support along the way. We think a key component of that is to be able to reach out to female entrepreneurs as females. So finding female investors who are the role models, who can be accessible and open to talk to female entrepreneurs in an environment that they find much more accessible, less macho, a little bit more down to earth. And there is a clear correlation between the way men will start up businesses and raise capital, which is always to be very ambitious and potentially over-exaggerate. Women have a different type of risk profile. And I know that is a sweeping statement, but there is some truth in that. And we've started running female-only workshops run by female investors at BGF, only available to female entrepreneurs. And the feedback from that has been fantastic. The female entrepreneurs have found it a safe environment to share ideas, to ask questions, not feeling they're going to be judged, but they're actually getting input from that. We think, and this is an initiative that originally came out of Alison Rose's report on female entrepreneurs, there is huge untapped potential in the UK economy if we can find a better way to get capital to support female-led entrepreneurs. And we've launched this with Coutts because we are trying to be practical, and certainly by saying we have funds available just to support female entrepreneurs is a good starting point. You then need to follow through. We've got to have the right mentoring. These have got to be good businesses. This is not a question of saying it's a gesture, so we will reduce investment standards. And our strong view is that this is a really rich seam that is not being tapped. And of course, what we will do by backing some of these businesses is to create the role models for other female entrepreneurs, and then you get into a virtuous circle. And currently, the sort of level of support is maybe 20% of what it needs to be. So we're talking about a major structural challenge within the economy, and therefore the macro impact of addressing this is huge. So we're hoping that Coutts Clouds are clearly going to support this, but that's almost secondary to recognizing there is a significant opportunity, and beyond gender, I think you can apply very similar comments in terms of wider diversity of management teams.
Thank you, Stephen. Well, I hope everyone's getting the impression that this is genuinely a patchwork quilt of initiatives that need to be taken, sort of knit together, small pieces that together make something really whole and impactful. There is no silver bullet, unfortunately. We know that, and we've tried for years, but a big change can happen with small steps coming together, and we reach a tipping point. Kathleen, in that regard, will you tell us briefly about the initiative that Goldman has undertaken around what investors can do in regard to investee companies and their gender balance?
Yeah, thank you so much. And I think we need to remember that while we have a lot of work to do within our own industry, we're also a powerful force outside of our industry. And as a firm, we committed last year to not taking any companies public that didn't have at least one diverse member on their board in both the US and Europe. And that was in effect as of this past July 2020. And as of summer 2021, that number will go up to 2. So that's firm-wide within my own division. We mirrored that for the companies that we invest in or control on the private side, not taking them public without at least one diverse member that will go up to 2. And then on the public side, as asset managers, we really do have a big role to play. We can drive and push the agenda because we truly believe that diverse teams have the potential to provide outperformance and better results. So, within my own firm, between March 19 and June 2020, we voted against 888 global companies that didn't have, for lack of diversity on their board. Of the 322 US companies that we voted against, 47% of them have since added at least one one woman to their board. So there is movement we can make. We have a voice. What we believe in, we can stand behind with the power of being in the asset management industry. and the companies that we invest in and control.
Brilliant. Here to that. And I'm going to ask, actually going to change the order a little bit so that we give Claire the last word, because we're running out of time, I'm afraid. But I'm going to ask Sasha, because Claire had the first word, she should have last. So I'm going to ask Sasha to go next, because one of the two specific work projects that the Working Families Group is embarking on this year is one on careers. So actually, as we've been hopefully emphasizing, and you've got the message here, this is not about just sort of allowing women the sort of license to work here and give them a bit of flexibility and so forth. Someone's made a good point in the questions that if fund managers and senior people don't work flexibly, then we won't get on as women, we won't get our careers developed. So can you tell us a little bit about, you know, the seeds of this project and what you are planning on doing with this careers aspect of the Working Families Group?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Helena. So yeah, it's all about helping women maintain and grow their career once they have a family. So, you know, many women find their career and pay prospects are slowing down. They need to work flexibly. They may be overlooked for promotion or new roles, or overwhelmed, as we're hearing today, with juggling childcare demands and balancing it with their work deliverables. And often career is, you know, they don't have the time, even the headspace to focus on their own career, both kind of in the pandemic and beyond. And it's not just a short-term thing when they're returning from mat leave, it's actually throughout their whole working lives as they support their families. And, you know, we're looking at different ways of, you know, helping them. So sometimes mothers just need a buddy that taps on their shoulder, reminds them to be visible, you know, take time to have that coffee, build and maintain their network. So what we're doing really is we're bringing together lots and lots of different ideas, and we're looking to frame a best practice for firms that help support the careers of female employees. And not just once they've had children, but before, when they're planning, and during their mat leave, and when they return from mat leave as parents. And, you know, Stuart mentioned the HSBC initiative for female portfolio managers, and we're connected in with that so that we'll draw that piece in. And we're going to be launching a marketing campaign to encourage member firms to adopt that best practice. And obviously, it's really important to note that, you know, yes, it's mainly a female issue today, but once more men take up the parental leave, the issue will become a much broader issue for the workforce. And I'll hand back to you, as I know Claire's going to touch on that very piece.
Thanks so much, Sasha. Well, it is fitting that Claire has the last word on the other main project of the Working Families Group, which is shared parental leave, because one of the comments in the chat from Fiona has also been, you know, about needing to level the playing field, that this is, you know, actually about changing centuries of working practices. Tell us a bit about the shared parental leave project, and also go ahead and ask for people to get involved.
So our work stream obviously is tackling the issue of the lack of take-up of shared parental leave in the industry. Since it was introduced in 2015, the take-up has continued to be low, despite some organisations matching their shared parental leave provision to their enhanced maternity leave provision. And in the 2020 workingfamilies.org benchmark survey, it was found that only 9% of employers had introduced a shared parental leave target and strategy to encourage take-up. Now, there is much data available highlighting the benefits of that early father bonding time with their newborn, as well as this really helping to support women returning to the workplace after a period of leave. Our call to action will be focused on firms creating a robust, sustainable, flexible working culture where parents feel comfortable asking for and taking shared parental leave, which is essential for take-up. And we also feel that this is the single biggest influencer that could help turn the tide on the gender pay gap.
Great. Well, you heard it here then. We'll look for everyone to get involved, hopefully. Hopefully what you've heard today will have made you think that we have at least as much of an opportunity as a threat from the pandemic. The Diversity Project is not going to rest, be relaxed or complacent. We are going to be redoubling our efforts to ensure that women and ethnic minorities and anybody who's underrepresented today, that we don't go backwards on the embryonic progress that we're making so far. So thank you all for your support and for listening. We will be doing, there's a recording of this session that will be available. We will also be doing a note which will summarize the actions that we propose, but also the key messages from each of the panelists that we didn't have time to conclude our session with today. So look out for that. It'll be a very simple one page, and please do share it with your colleagues. But thank you very much for attending today, and apologies for anybody who got caught up in my sort of parallel universe session earlier on. But thank you so much and goodbye. Hope to see you again soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.